Hi, everyone. I want to cover the issue of the relationship between religion and the environment by looking at a specific case of things that are happening in Thailand, and these rituals are called tree ordinations. And I want to make a case for tree ordinations as a response of Buddhist Thais to the problem of environmental destruction and deforestation in their country. So, the story here begins after World War II, when Thailand saw a period of rapid deforestation. There was a lot of logging in the country, and there was also a lot of agricultural expansion. In other words, people were cutting the forest in order to plant new farm fields. And eventually this deforestation got to the point where the government saw the need to act to start to restrict the amount of deforestation. And one of the actions that they took was that the government banned commercial logging, and it tightened restrictions on farmers' use of public forest land. So just like in the US, in Thailand there is public land that's used for some purposes by private citizens, and some of those people are farmers. And so farmers who live near public land in the past had cut down trees and planted fields on that land. Well, the government got very tough and tight on restricting access to those public lands. And of course, this was very difficult for farmers living in those areas because they had been using those lands for farm fields, for hunting, for gathering edible plants, and for gathering wood, for home repair, and for firewood, and so on. And suddenly they were restricted from those kinds of uses. Another thing that happened in that period was that some people, just members of the public, started to found environmental organizations. And some of these groups were urban-based and secular, but others were rural-based and had explicitly Buddhist ideals and ethics behind them. And so these Buddhist environmentalist organizations were promoting a Buddhist argument for conserving the forest. So, as I said, one problem that arose in the period of heightened environmental concern in Thailand was that farmers were restricted from using the forests for some uses that they had had for a long time. And so some of the rural environmental groups were trying to conserve the forest, but also remained sensitive to the fact that farmers still wanted to use the forest for certain things like hunting and gathering firewood and so on. So these organizations recognized that it was going to be difficult for farmers to completely stop using the forest. And this slideshow, the rest of the slideshow, is about one rural environmental effort to use Buddhism to try to conserve the forest and allow for some local farmers to use the forest in a sensible manner at the same time. And so this is basically a story of how they accomplished that goal. So beginning in the 1980s, some Thai Buddhist monks and lay people began making these Buddhist arguments for conservation. And these arguments were new in the sense that no one in Thailand had made a systematic pro-environment argument in Buddhist terms before. So they were taking old ideas about Buddhism and kind of making them into something a bit new to fit the current circumstances. And what they did was they took some traditional Buddhist ideas, such as the idea of that you're prohibited to take life, and they shifted it a little bit. So in the past, the Buddhist idea about taking life was you shouldn't take the life of sentient beings. In other words, beings that have a consciousness or a mind. Which traditionally included, of course, not just humans, but also animals. And the Buddhist environmentalists said, well, we can extend that prohibition against taking life to plants as well. And they pointed to certain things in the Buddhist statements when he was alive that supported their point. So, for example, when the Buddha talked about how monks were supposed to live, he prohibited the first monks from cutting down trees to build their dwellings. And so the Buddhist environmentalists said, well, this shows that the Buddha was sensitive to the problem of deforestation because monks, I mean, these are the people who live, the most exemplary Buddhist lives, are not supposed to cut down trees. It's almost like they are setting the example for the rest of us to follow. So perhaps we too should at least be cautious about cutting down too many trees. Another major argument that they made was that, the main point, they said, of Buddhism is to end suffering. And they said, look, environmental destruction like deforestation causes a lot of suffering, because deforestation damages the natural environment, and it's the environment in which people are making a living. So, for example, when you cut down the forest, something that people observed in Thailand was that the waterways become very erratic. And so, for example, instead of a regular flow of water through the streams and rivers, there would be big floods of water all at once, and then the rivers would dry up. And there's some ecological reasons why cutting down a lot of trees in an area would cause this kind of effect. So they argue good Buddhists should care for the environment because a healthy environment decreases suffering, especially among poor people. So this concern for the decrease, for the reduction in the end of suffering, and for the protection of living creatures is something that was in Buddhism before. But these organizations and their leaders, and especially the monks in these organizations, started to make a systematic argument that, hey, we should be careful and not do too much deforestation. So with these new ideas in place, some Buddhist monks in northern Thailand pioneered a new Buddhist ritual called a tree ordination. And so normally when a man is ordained as a monk, he undergoes a ritual that involves taking on the robes of a monk and having his head shaved and other things. What the monks said, though, is they said, we can do the same thing for trees, because we can confer on trees the sacred status that monks enjoy, and therefore it would be a grave sin to cut down a tree that had undergone this ordination ritual. It's kind of like treating trees like people and ordaining them as if they were monks. Now, tree ordinations received some popular support, and because the ordained forests were protected from cutting. However, they were still open for other uses, so the monks who headed this said, look, we don't want people to cut these forests, but you can go in and you can collect firewood and you can collect plants. You can't hunt, because that would mean taking life, and that's not appropriate for a sacred forest, but you can collect plants and firewood. And so, for example, local farmers could still go in and collect medicinal herbs and edible plants. And this was different from the total ban on use that the government had been proposing. So a lot of rural people, especially farmers, were really interested in this tree ordination idea because they saw it as a good compromise, and because it prohibited cutting, but it allowed these other uses. So the ordinations sort of helped further two goals that were important to the organizers. They conserve discrete areas of the forest, and they preserve some local use rights. And they send a message to the government that local people can manage their own forests responsibly, and that the government doesn't have to come in and impose a total ban on use. So these tree ordinations really intertwine religious innovation, environmentalism, and the political struggle of rural people for control over land. That's what I mean when I say this is a case of political and religious innovation. So here I want to just show you some images of a tree ordination that I attended. This particular event happened in the late 90s, but these events are happening constantly in Thailand ever since then. And so at the start of this ordination, the man in the foreground, a layperson, is lighting a candle on the altar, while the monks in the background prepare to deliver the Buddhist chants that are part of the ritual. Here you can see a monk preparing holy water while chanting. These chants are part of every Buddhist ritual. However, this time the chants that the leaders chose included the Buddha's instructions to monks, the instructions that said, do not fell, do not cut any trees. So they picked chants that were relevant to the tree ordination context. And this is just an image of the audience as they listen to the chanting. Part of the ritual, like most Buddhist rituals in Thailand, is there's a time to make offerings to the monks. And that's what the mostly men on the left are doing. They're making offerings to the monks on the right. The older man sitting with his back to us is a ritual specialist, a lay ritual specialist from the local village. And you can see that he's participating in the event. You can see in the background there are people with video cameras. Those are actually from local TV stations covering the event. And the organizers of this ritual were very happy that they were there because they wanted to see the idea of tree ordination spread to other parts of the country. This monk holding the microphone was one of the main leaders of the tree ordination effort. He's actually kind of the theological brains behind some of these innovations in terms of ritual and the chants that were used and all of these other Buddhist environmentalist ideas. And he's basically delivering a sermon here about how the Buddha wanted people to take care of the environment. Here's an image of the audience singing the national anthem. At one point, these events were not just religious, but they were also patriotic. The organizers of the events were very anxious to show that they were good, patriotic Thai people who cared about the country and about their religion, and that was why they wanted to conserve and protect the forest. This is a picture from the tree ordination that illustrates a nationalist or national pride aspect to the rituals. Thais tend to talk about their country in terms of three things: nation, religion, king. And in this picture, you can see the monks chanting in the background, but you can also see a Thai flag in the foreground, kind of hidden a little bit behind a tree on the left-hand side of the picture. And you can also see a statue of the Buddha at the very top of the altar. And finally, there's a portrait toward the right-hand side of a man who's the king of Thailand. And these are all very powerful symbols of the nation. And so again, the people who organize this ritual want to send a political message that we are good, responsible, country-loving Thai people, and good Buddhists, and environmentalists. The monk in charge of this ritual and a local official are wrapping the biggest tree in the area with an ordination cloth. This cloth is seen as the same color as the monk's robes. I know it's a slightly different hue, but it's seen as equivalent to the robes of a monk. So this tree is standing for all the other trees in this sacred forest. They actually planted a boat tree. The man holding the watering can is a member of the Thai Senate, and so his presence is very important. And the boat tree has religious significance to Buddhists that you can look up if you like. This is the Thai senator once again wrapping one of the smaller trees. So people took cloths out into the forest and wrapped some of the smaller trees to show that these trees were sacred. And this woman did something I didn't see anybody else do. She wrapped the tree with the strip of cloth like a monk's robe, but she also put a portrait of the king of Thailand on it, as if to say, yes, this is the right thing to do. This is a good thing to do for the environment, for Buddhism, for the country. And then afterward, there was a party, and everybody danced and ate and had fun. So, I want to take up this question, well, is Buddhism an environmentalist religion in light of what we just saw? And Winslow, he presents different anthropological debates about the ecological impact of religion. And this case of tree ordinations kind of raises that. So, is Buddhism an environmentalist religion? Of course, some Buddhists and observers of Buddhism would say, yes, clearly Buddhism is inherently environmentalist. But this yes is not really, is kind of problematic, because it's not that simple. I mean, one problem is that if Buddhism is so environmentalist, then how did Thailand get into all this trouble with deforestation in the first place? And I would propose this answer, that it was economically beneficial to log all those logs and to plant all those fields. In other words, there were material motivations for destroying the forest that overwhelmed any Buddhist environmentalist urges that people had. Later, after the damage was done, people looked to their religion as a way to recover and help the forest to recover from the damage that had been done. But in this case, I think it's clear that religion was a secondary force motivating people's actions, subordinate to the economic forces at work. I'll leave you here to consider these questions, and I will see you online.